Sport Analyst F1 here. I've bet on the Formula 1 professionally for the last 7 years, accumulating over 6 weeks of profit in that time. And I'm going to be bringing you a race analysis video after every single race in 2025. Now, what can you expect from these videos? First of all, I'm going to be discussing my bets, my rationale for taking the bets, talking about the racing in a general sense. So if you want to learn about the racing in more detail, then these are the videos for you. The sort of segments I've got going in these videos, I've got an SAF1 Driver Championship. So this is a championship when we're ranking the drivers from best to worst across the weekend, giving them points for best performing to worst performing, and then we'll be tallying these scores up throughout the season, and that's going to give us a little rankings championship to decipher who's going to be performing the best throughout the season, who's going to be the worst, subjective to my opinion, effectively. So stay tuned for that. I've also got an SAF1 analysis notes section, which is just my key takeaways from each race weekend. That comes later in the video also, so stick around for that. And yeah, I'm just hoping you guys can get a bit of value out of my knowledge, effectively, on the Formula 1. So yeah, let's get into it. Let's just get straight into it, no messing around. So let's bring you back to testing. Now, I want to start off by talking about my season-long bets. And a lot of these went on over through testing and practice in Australia as well. First bet, 2K on McLaren Constructors Champions. So going into the weekend, going into practice, the odds on Ferrari and McLaren were very similar. They're both sort of favourites for the bookies. And I wasn't personally sure which way I was favouring. I was unsure going into testing. Obviously, Hamilton's moved to Ferrari. So you got Leclerc, Hamilton in the Ferrari, and then obviously Piastri and Norris in the McLaren. And then you've got a couple of sort of rookies coming into the Mercedes and Red Bull. The bookies had the Red Bull and Mercedes at around like 6 to 7, 8 to 1. And the thing is, it's the last year of the current rule set regulations. So there's only so much margin in how much the teams can develop their car in terms of pace. So once you've got someone like an Antonelli or a Lawson coming in who isn't going to be performing at the same level as the other two teams in terms of the driver pairings, you're not going to be able to just develop the car enough to overturn that disadvantage by having a worse driver. So when the bookies are offering the odds of like 6 to 1, 7 to 1, they're never in 1,000 years going to be able to challenge for a championship. So with that in mind, it was just down to Ferrari or McLaren in terms of who I'm going to take a bet on. And now we went to Prix and test. The first day, pretty pointless. You don't really know what's going on. Then the second test, they started doing a few more meaningful runs. And one thing I picked up on straight away is the news that Ferrari decided to basically revamp their car with 1 year left of the current rule set regulations, which is a bold move. And the reason they revamped the car, just completely gone away from the old design from last year, is because they thought they had reached the ceiling of development with that car. Bearing in mind, pretty much every other team as well had just stuck with their original car concept. But Ferrari just decided to revamp completely. So when you account for that, and you also account for the fact that, McLaren 2 years ago, they were at the back of the grid, but they've understood their car so well, and the upgrades that they've brought over the last year and a half has pinged them, rocketed them to the front of the grid. So every time they bring an upgrade, they're just so on the money with it. They're upgrading their car so efficiently. The trajectory of that team in terms of bringing developments to the car and it working. When you take into account that McLaren stuck with their original car concept and developed on it, and they're pretty happy with that, and this is the news coming out of testing, and then meanwhile you hear that Ferrari have just completely changed their car. To change the car and then with a new sort of philosophy and get that right and try and be as competitive as a McLaren, who's obviously just every time they bring upgrades, they're just going to rocket past them in terms of it working. I just thought that if Ferrari's going to have to change the car concept, they're going to be less competitive to start off with. It's going to be really hard to nail that car concept and be as successful as someone who's already further in the trajectory of that development path, such as McLaren. That was a green flag for me. That was a big green flag, and I was like, yeah, I like that. But obviously, I want to see the cars out on track. And second day, just analysing the cars as well, the McLaren just looks so hooked up, like. And then as opposed to watching the other teams as well, the Ferrari is just a bit more hard to handle. There wasn't really good vibes coming out of Red Bull either. So these odds haven't moved the bookmakers, and I'm liking what I'm seeing on track and in terms of a sort of philosophy standpoint, a technical standpoint as well. And then you started to hear long runs coming out. McLaren were more competitive than their main competitors. Again, these odds aren't moving the bookmakers, so there's a lot of green flags there, and I just felt pretty strongly about taking a big bet on McLaren for those reasons. Additionally, because it's the last year of the rule set, they've done so many laps with this car. They know how fast they are over the Bahrain GP track because we ran the test as well. So there's not really much to gain from sandbagging this year in testing because everyone sort of knows roughly where they're at, and there's not going to be huge gains to be made. When you see a lot strong performance long run, you can take that on face value to some degree, more than other years sort of coming up. For example, next year when they change the rule set, so if someone comes out the box next year with a quick car, they might want to sandbag because no one really knows how quick the cars are, and they probably don't want to show their hand and then put a load of pressure on them to start the first race. So anyway, what I'm trying to say is you could take the testing times of face value. I thought a little bit more this year, and that's why I backed them. Next bet, £1,500 on Williams to beat Aston Martin in the Constructors' Championship in 2025. Now, this went on during practice for the Australian GP, and he was getting 4 to 6. Now, there wasn't good vibes coming out of testing for Aston Martin. Now, you've got to consider that Adrian Newey has just joined the team, like basically the best car designer of all time. He just joined the Aston Martin team last year for like 100 million or something stupid. Now, he's not going to be putting a load of effort and emphasis onto this year's car because it's the last set of the rules. So Aston Martin brought Newey in with the idea of him putting a lot of work and design method and thoughts into delivering and designing next year's car. So, there's arguments to say that Aston Martin can just leave this year to some degree and put all their eggs in one basket for next year. So that's one reason why Aston Martin were more likely going to be not so competitive this year. And then additionally, you saw that in testing, Sainz and Albon, they were on it. The car looked strong. Sainz went quickest in pre-season testing, and they were backing it up. Sainz P2, or believe in practice 1. I might be wrong, maybe P3. Yeah, so many green flags that you just got to take a bet there. Additionally, Stroll, he's a paid driver, Daddy Stroll, and all that. He's never going to be able to outperform Sainz and Albon. Alonso's probably on their level, but he's 40 years old now. So even him, he's not going to be performing at as consistent level. And you've got Stroll, who just has on and off weekends, and he's just not good enough as a whole, really. No offense to Stroll. So yeah, that's always just going to win. Anyway, let me rattle through the other two season-long bets I've got. £275 on Lando Norris, world champion, for the same reasons as the McLaren bet. And then also £500 on Antonelli to beat Lawson over the course of the season. I think that's 8 to 13 I got as well. Not too much to be said about them. Right, next section. Sorry, I've spent so long on that. Right, let's just get straight into the race. So, we've got 5 rookies on the grid in 2025. And they see the first race of the season. They've got a wet race. What a nightmare. A wet race around Australia. It's not just any track either. There's walls close by. The conditions look nasty. Like, as a rookie, all you want to do is just get your first race completed, get your first race distance in your locker, and not draw any eyes to yourself, really. You just want a calm weekend, really, just to complete the race. Anyway, that's not going to happen in these conditions. It was always going to be carnage. And first corner of the formation lap, Isaac Hadjar just bins it, lights the rear tyres out, and just sticks it in the wall. Not even going very fast. Obviously, he just doesn't know how much he can accelerate in the wet. Like, he has no experience in the car in the wet before. And I just felt really bad for him. And he did such a good performance on the Saturday in qualifying. Almost reached Q3 in his first outing. Just heartbreaking just to see him smash it in the wall. And he ended up crying on the way back to the pit lane. Just embarrassed, all his family. He's got him to the Formula 1. All his friends watching. He just stuck it in the wall. Not even when they're racing. Not a good look. But I sympathise with him personally. Like, it's going to happen in your first race when it's pouring wet in Australia. Like, it's going to happen. And it did happen for Jack Doohan also. On the 5th corner, I think it was, of the first lap. Luckily, all the cars actually got through the first corner okay. Apart from Hadji on the formation lap. But actually, when they started racing the first corner, they all got through okay. Got to the fifth corner though, and Doohan again just lights the rears up, bins it in the wall, brings out a safety car, and with 1 lap into the race, well, half a lap into the race, we've lost 2 drivers already. So the safety car comes out, and then on lap 2, Carlos Sainz, experienced driver, just coming to Williams obviously, and he's just binned it in the wall under the safety car. Now I'd argue that's worse than Jack Doohan and IJ Hadjar's mistake because they have no experience, but he is an experienced driver, and to make that sort of error under the safety car, it's just poor. It is poor from Sainz. That's probably the worst mistake out of a lot of them. Um, So yeah, the safety car just carried on going around the strong, sort of taking the cars through the pit lane whilst they were figuring that out. And then we got racing again, lap 7. And I've also forgot to mention Verstappen around the outside of Piastri in lap 1 in true Max Verstappen style. The kid's just a genius in the wet. Just sees Piastri sort of go early to defend him, runs a little bit wide, struggles to get the power down, and then a sort of Brazil 2016 fashion just swipes around the outside. Oh, it was delightful to watch. And end up splitting the McLarens to be able to put the pressure on Norris. So we got racing again on lap 7. And for the next 20 or so laps, Verstappen was really trying to mount the pressure onto Norris in a far inferior car than Norris. You know, that McLaren has got some pace about it this year. So he was really, really just trying hard to apply some pressure on Norris, and he was. And it's always easier being the car behind. It's never easy being the car in front in the wet. Because you don't know how fast you can take each corner, and you're sort of judging it when you're in front. But when you're behind, you've got that reference, and you can see if they've made a mistake in one corner, then you can slow down through that corner. Or if they've taken that corner quite easy, you can edge out and go a little bit quicker. So it's always easier to be the car following. So he's mounting the pressure on Norris, and I felt like Norris was doing pretty good job. You know, after last year, he had cracked under pressure quite a few times. This was a good test, even though he had a far superior car. Anyway, so Verstappen was mounting the pressure on. He's done so well at this point just to put some pressure on Norris. But ultimately, you know, he's overheating the tyres because he's trying to drive out. He's trying to outperform the car, and eventually he locks up, makes a small error into the 15th turn or something. The turn after the fast left right, going into sector 3. Locks up, that lets Piastri through. And then it's Piastri's turn to mount the pressure on, and Verstappen just has to run his own race at that point because he's driving too fast for how the car can handle with the amount of tyre heat he's putting into the tyres. So it's Piastri's turn then to mount some pressure onto Norris. And then we get to lap. Yeah, and then we get to lap around 30. And Piastri's like within half a second of Norris at this point, really mounting the pressure. Yeah, the track started drying out a little bit at this point as well. So, and you get Max Verstappen, you get Zach Brown come on the radio being like, "Oh, we're deciding to hold position." It's the first race of the season, mate. It's the first race of the season. You've just signed Piastri on a money contract, a decent money contract. And you're telling him at his home race to hold position. Like, come on, that's not a good look, mate. You've just got to let him race. First race of the season. I get it from a team point of view, but mate, you're asking for trouble. You can't be letting him not race at his home race when he's just battling for the lead, and in the year beforehand as well, he had to let Norris past. McLaren need to sort their stuff out, honestly. It's poor to see. It's not a good look. Anyway, after like 3 laps of indecision, Zach Brown just said, "Yeah, you can race again now." Like they don't know what they're doing. They can't manage the team very well, and in my opinion, they are going to collide. This is my bold prediction this year: Norris and Piastri will take each other out in one race, and then it will just be complete carnage in the media and making a massive story out of it, just because they can't handle the drivers at all well. It's not difficult. Poor, in my opinion. Anyway, a few laps after that, Alonso. Oh my god. The track's drying out at this point. Alonso's put a solid race together, sat in P10. Comes through into sector 2, the fast right, just as you start sector 2. Takes the curb like every other lap. And there's just so much gravel on the track. So much gravel on the track, and he ends up spinning it, and I had quite a bit of money on him as well. So this is where my race went to shit. Alonso, and like if you're gonna back any driver in this weather, like 40-year-old Alonso, the veteran, he's had some past experience in the wet around this track, 2011, I believe. Like when you look and you see a wet race, one of the first people you think of to perform well is the veteran Fernando. And the last 2 times I backed him in the wet, Brazil last year and this race, he's made an error that's cost me. So maybe it's just his age getting to him a little bit, and he's just not quite as cognitively on it all the time. Or maybe it was just unlucky and there was a lot of gravel on the track, and he was surprised that he spun himself. So I personally think it was a bit unfortunate, to be honest. But yeah, that was a bit disappointing. Well, very disappointing at the time. But that brought the safety car out, and at this point, the track was dry enough for slicks. So when the safety car came out, all the teams started boxing to go onto slicks, onto the dry tyres. Anyway, about 5 laps later, the safety car goes in and we get racing again on lap 41. Out of 57, so 15 laps remaining or so. And there's a massive rain shower that's being reported after they've all boxed the slicks, after they're back on slicks and racing. Massive rain shower on the forecast for about 3 laps time. So the teams are unsure whether they're going to need to rebox again to go back onto the inters if this rain shower is large enough. And it turned out that boxing was the right strategy because it rained so much. And it was in fact the teams that boxed first got the advantage. So if you box first, you got a massive advantage, and if you box last, you were too far gone and lost too much time out on the dry tyres on the wet track. So there's a lot of calamity over whether to box or not. But this is the order that the teams boxed in and the drivers boxed in. So let me pull up my phone, and I've got it all listed here. So first drivers to box were Norris, Russell, Albon, Antonelli, Stroll and Hulk. So they boxed at the very first lap where it was just a changeover onto what should have been wet tyres on a wet track. And they took that and they went with it. So they got a massive advantage. And fair play to Mercedes because they double stacked. They thought, let's bring Antonelli in as well at the same lap because they were that confident that it was that wet. So those drivers massively prospered. Then the next lap, Piastri and Oliver Bearman came in. The lap after that, Verstappen and Gasly came in. Now you've got to note at this point, Verstappen had quite a big gap to the third place car, which was Russell at the time, so he didn't actually lose out. He was willing to take the gamble to try and stay out a couple of extra laps, and he didn't lose position out of it. So that was good from Verstappen. He took the chance to try and stay out, and he couldn't do it, but he didn't lose a spot. Unfortunately, because Gasly boxed 2 laps after Antonelli, Stroll, Hulk, he lost all those positions and those guys all jumped up. And then after Gasly and Verstappen boxed, you had Lawson trying to stay out with Ocon, and Lawson, no fault to his own really, just binned it because the track was too wet and he stayed out on the dries. And he had to take a gamble because he was so far off it all weekend. He was sat at the back, so that's just how it went down. And then when the safety car came out, then both Ferraris, Hamilton and Leclerc, decided to try and stay out, and Yuki at this point. But obviously when the safety car came out, they knew it was too wet at that point, and they were the last to box. And at this point, all those other drivers that we just discussed jumped them pretty much. So they came out in 12th, 11th, 10th, around those positions. So it didn't work out from their perspective, and they were sat just lingering outside the points to that point. So that's how it played out. And as all those drivers were pitting, it was absolute carnage. Before the safety car came out, in the crossover period, absolute carnage. Let me just go through off the top of my memory what actually happened in terms of people drivers spinning and whatnot. So you had Norris and Piastri completely pushing each other at the critical point of the race that this was. Going into that fast right-hander in sector 3, just for for that chicane right at the very end. I don't know what turn it is. Norris and Piastri just went too fast. Both slid onto the gravel. Norris able to slow his car down just enough to get it back on track. Piastri let the momentum through the gravel take him a little bit more, and he came on back onto the grass with a bit of momentum. And after performing such a strong race, and all weekend really from Piastri, just the car went a little bit sideways as he came back onto the grass, slid over the tarmac onto the grass patch the other side of the track, and he's facing backwards at this point with the slope of the grass facing a little bit down. So he's trying to get some traction and he just can't, and he's stuck. And again, I had a solid bet on Piastri podium at great odds. Got him before the weekend at like 2.75. Just all the rain just screwing me over at this point so badly. It's brutal. It was such an easy bet. Just Piastri podium, just have a dry race, just lands so easily. It's printing money, It just gets really unlucky. And that was an unlucky error from Piastri, I have to say. That was a very unlucky moment to be able to get stuck in the grass like that. When he basically did the same as Norris, we just carried a little bit more momentum coming out of the gravel. So that was gutting to see. That was one incident. We had Yuki Tsunoda holding off. I think at this point he was in front of like Hamilton, Gasly. So he had a little spin coming into the last corner as well. Slid onto the grass, similar to Norris and Piastri. You didn't really get to see this on the feed properly, but yeah, he slid onto the grass. That allowed Gasly and Hamilton through. And then we also had Leclerc. Leclerc was ahead of Gasly and Hamilton at this point. He span coming into the same corner that Verstappen locked up early into the race. Leclerc spun there as well. We had Bortoletto binning it in the wall, trying to do something. Off the top of my head, that was most of it. So yeah, after the safety car came in and the order was jumbled up, we had all those front runners who boxed early getting into the points, and then we had Norris and Verstappen again at the front. And fair play to Norris and McLaren, because last year they would bottle it under a lot of pressure, but they made a lot of strategic moves that race which were correct, and that came down to a lot of Norris keeping his composure, I felt. And that's the sort of performance off the bat that he really needs. And I get the sense from Norris this year that he's gonna have a lot more of a calm head on his shoulders. I think he's taken a lot of learnings from last year, and he seems a lot more confident in himself this year. Yeah, fair play to Norris. Handled the race very well. He had the quickest car, but under a lot of pressure that race, and he managed to seal it. So that was very good. We had Russell picking up the pieces from Piastri, clinched the podium. Then we had Antonelli overtaking Albon, but I think Albon knew he had a 5-second penalty towards the end, so he let him have it, and then reclaimed that position with the 5-second penalty applied to Kimi, Antonelli, fair result, but he obviously got massively lucky at the safety car, getting double stacked, and I think that would be Mercedes' decision to double stack him as well. So he's just sort of picked up the pieces, and he's managed to keep it on track, unlike a lot of the other rookies. So fair play to him. So he took some nice points home, coming in P5 or 6. Then we had Hulk. Hulk, he's definitely made a decision there with his experience to say when he wants to box. And that's the sort of decision that has paid him off and got him some points. Considering Sauber didn't score any points last year, the season pro Hulk comes in, finds a wet race where he's delightful and he just makes the right decision, gets points on the board. It's a clinic from Hulk, really. Just what you need. Highly rated. I really highly rate Hulk. And then we had Gasly. Oh my god, this is my other major bet. Alongside Alonso binning it in the wall, alongside Piastri podium, where he just spins in the grass, bins it. We had Gasly to get points after running P9, P8 the whole race. After Sonoda spinning out and him going past him when all the clemency was going on. Gasly, sorry, points finish. After he pits a bit later than, after he pits in the same lap as Verstappen, later than a lot of the other people, comes out P9, P10 with Piastri, with Hamilton and with Leclerc all behind him, with 3 or 4 laps to go when they get racing at this point. I just need him to cling on for some points. Oh, and he's got so much pressure with those 3 quick cars behind him, and he just runs slightly wide going into turn 1, goes over the grass. That gives Hamilton and Leclerc some momentum to get past him. And then Piastri takes him as well, and he's out of the points after running in points the whole race. Oh, honestly, about 5k just down the drain between these 3 drivers, and they all look great bets, and they were going in for half the race, you know. So yeah, not ideal. Very, very unlucky. And Gasly did an amazing weekend all weekend, just with 3 laps to go. Just makes that error. I've got a phone call. One sec. Anyway, talking about my bets. Here's my result from the weekend, as you can see on screen. Let me just run through these quickly because we've got the SAF1 Championship coming up. The Rankings Championship, so stay hold for that. And then we've also got my analysis notes, key analysis takeaways coming up also. So hold fire for them because they're shortly coming. Now, I want to bring your attention to Race Ready T-shirts, a new clothing store I've been working on Etsy. The store aims to bring you practical, trendy and quality F1 and motorsport related clothing from an affordable price point that gets you race ready. Whether you're watching the comfort of your own home or supporting your favourite driver at the track, Race Ready T-shirts will get you in the vibe with some crisp, unique designs. Note, all items are unisex clothing and you can enjoy a 15% discount when you order 3 or more items at once. On the left, we've got some Lewis Hamilton themed Friday T-shirts for 2025, which are in demand. And on the right, my personal favourite, the Track Collection T-shirts. Link in description. Right, so, my bets, here we go. Hulk to beat Bortoleto FB2. I mean, it's Bortoleto's second practice session and you're getting evens on Hulk. It's just free money. Then we had all the win margins. I thought 0.9 to 0.2 getting 3.4. I didn't think it would be over 0.2 second win margin because the field's going to be so close. And I thought they were quite good odds, but got quite unlucky. It went, all 3 qualifying win margins were 0.08, 0.09, 0.07. So just didn't quite get one fall in that 0 to 1 to 2 zone, which we needed. I thought that was a bit unlucky, but we got the practice one, so I didn't lose too much there. Gasly drifted massively on the Friday after he couldn't really set the car up amazingly well. However, a couple of years ago, Alpine they took 3 practice sessions and then showed their hand in qualifying. So I thought maybe they'll do that again, not show too much, and then get into qualifying and show their hand. So I thought they might do that a little bit. So I thought when the odds drifted on Gasly and all the hype around him being quite quick in pre-season testing, I thought that was a nice bet and one to take. And he did. He managed to clinch Q3, and you can see there was a betting site opening Q3 for Gasly at 9 odds, unbelievably. So I got a bit of money on that, and he scraped in at 9s. So that was nice, and then I backed him for the race as well, and topped up on the race for the race. Before the race, before qualifying actually. So I got a nice price on him in points finish as well because I thought that the rain would benefit him and that all the rookies would bin it, which they did. So that was Gasly. Unfortunately, just got massively unlucky that I've just discussed a minute ago about the points finish. Alonso points finish, again, one of the biggest bets, spoke about that. We had Norris race winner before the weekend at nice odds. That was placed during testing for obvious reasons. Yeah, classified finishes. Classified finishes another lovely value spot. Obviously, the rain shower being forecasted. With all the rookies, you're asking for trouble, and I got on that a bit before the bookies sort of clocked on to that, and the odds massively got crushed in towards the start of the race as the bookies knew it was raining. But yeah, I got on that a bit earlier, so that was lovely. Just unfortunately, yeah, it should have been about a 4 or 5, maybe it was 6K result. I was on for a 6K result for well over half a race. Alonso bins it, that brings out the safety car, the rain comes down, Piastri bins it, Gasly bins it, 5K down the drain. Yeah, it's a bit unlucky really. But that's my bets. Right, now let's get into the SAF1 Championship, which I have set up for us for this year. Now, effectively, what this is going to be is it's going to be me rating the drivers and ranking the drivers based on their performance throughout the weekend, with 10 points going to the best driver, and then 1 point going down to 1 point going to the 10th best driver. The drivers rated 11th through 19th won't really get mentioned. They won't get points. But the driver who's performed the worst on the weekend, in my opinion, who is the worst performing driver on the weekend, will get -3. And we're going to tally these totals up throughout the season. And that's going to give you guys who I think's performed the best and perform the worst throughout the season. And obviously, I think my opinion is pretty valid. So we should get quite a fair, transparent reflection on how well each driver's performed relative to one another. Especially because we are judging the drivers based on their driving performance and not how quick the car is. We're sort of subtracting how quick I think the car is, and that's obviously a subjective thing. So we're going to subjectively count for how quick the car is, and then just solely base the and rate the drivers based on their driving performance. Right, so let's get in to my ratings for the Australian GP. So on screen you can see my ratings now. Verstappen, he started off his Friday with the car not quite working very well and a bit out of the setup window. So he's managed to get his car into a good setup window, managed to stick it P3 whilst his teammates languishing down the bottom of the grid. I feel a bit bad for Lawson, any driver who steps in that second Red Bull seat, just because the car's all adapted around Verstappen. There's been quality drivers that stepped in that second Red Bull seat, and none of them can get it right, just because the car is so adapted so finely around Verstappen's driving style, I believe. But regardless, I still think it's a dog of a car, and Verstappen's just muscling it into P3 on the grid, and then also puts a lot of pressure on Norris in the wet. When you consider he qualified, 3 or 4 tenths behind Norris and Piastri in qualifying, to be able to put Norris under pressure in the race, I thought he did a phenomenal drive, and he was putting pressure on to the extent that he overheated the tyres and then made a little bit of an error, but he only made that error because he was outperforming the car massively and out driving it. So that's Verstappen. Norris, for obvious reasons, really did well when it came to deciding whether to put the wets back on and reboxing. He was quite instrumental in making his decision and viewpoint known, and they backed him up on that. And also massive pressure all race applied to him by both Verstappen and Piastri. And like I said, held out nicely. Then we've got Albon and Russell. Now I couldn't really separate these two. I thought they both did a pretty similar performance and both zero issues, like literally zero issues all weekend really. Both strong performances, but I'm going to give it to Albon for third, just because he's had a teammate come in, a more experienced sort of teammate come in, and that probably applied a little bit more pressure on him, and he's also fighting a little bit further up the grid this race. So just for that little bit of added pressure there, I'm going to put him ahead of Russell, who I thought drove a phenomenal race in his own respect. Then we've got Hulkenberg, as already previously discussed. Lovely drive from Hulk, and when the car's not quick enough to get into points, all you can really do is make the right decision in these rainy races that provides you opportunities to get a handful of points, and Hulk did that sublimely well. And yeah, he was definitely instrumental in making the decision to box at that time, using experience. So yeah, he did get out qualified by his teammate in qualifying, but you know, really all you got to do with that sort of car when you're outside the points and outside the top 10 fastest sort of driver team combinations is when you get a wet race, take advantage, and that's what he did. And then Tsunoda. Now I'd say, yeah, the next sort of 6 drivers was quite hard to order, but we've given it to Tsunoda, right? Just for 6th because he's qualified 5th. Unbelievable lap. He did make a small mistake when it started raining, letting Hamilton and Gasly through. He stayed out a bit longer. Obviously, that was probably his team/driver combination making the decision. So we're not going to give him too much of a downgrade for that because it was unlucky. Like it could have gone either way. Could have stayed out and it would stop raining enough, and it would have been a good decision. I can't really give too much decrease for Tsunoda's performance just because he decided to stay out. Like I think that was just unlucky. But yeah, performed really good qualifying lap, which just brought him in the 6th place in my rankings. A little mistake, like I said. Then Gasly, 0 issues all weekend. Got shafted again by staying out on the dries. Like it was a gamble. You didn't really know what was happening, but he did a really, really good performance up until that point. Then at the end of the race, obviously the safety car came out, letting all the people who did box through. Not really his fault, but then he did make a small error fighting for a couple of points at the end, and that has cost him. That's cost him, you know, a few points. So he's done really well in that Alpine, to be fair. But I thought he deserves going above Leclerc and Hamilton, which are my next 2 drivers on my list that I'm giving points to because he's got an inferior car, and I thought he did a really good job all weekend. Leclerc, again, not a bad job all weekend. However, he did spin in the race, and that was a proper spin. Gasly only sort of went off track. He didn't properly spin, but Leclerc properly span. Lost him a lot of race time before the second safety car came out, I believe. And obviously, Leclerc and Hamilton stayed out, so they dropped back after they pitted too late. But yeah, I thought I'd give Leclerc upper hand over Hamilton because he did out-qualify him. He did overtake him outside. He did overtake him on the outside of the track into turn 1 on the safety car restart to claim that 1 position off him. And he did have the upper hand on Hamilton all weekend, but he did make that slight mistake, that spin. But I'm going to nudge it to Leclerc just for being the fastest driver on the weekend. Hamilton, no issues, wasn't really very quick all weekend, but he kept it on track in the rain, and that's earned him a 9th spot. And then Ocon, again, one of the only few drivers not to make any issues or any mistakes in the race, just didn't have the pace in the car. But, you know, if he's going to be languishing down in those lower positions all weekend, then, all season, then we're going to have to give him some points at some point. And I thought that in a race where half the grid didn't basically finish, Ocon deserves to get in that 10th spot. But it was very close with the following 3 drivers. And I wasn't sure who to give these sort of 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th and 13th spots to. But close contenders for the P10 and for getting points were Piastri. Thought he did an outstanding sort of performance all weekend. Very, very strong. However, these fine margins in the wet that can cost you big, and he's fighting for the championship here, and he's ended up going too fast through the gravel, skidding, sliding into the grass, which I thought was very unlucky, but that knocks him outside of my top 10 purely for the reasons the Ocon didn't make a mistake, and then all the other sort of mistakes the drivers above him made were small ones. They weren't big ones like Piastri's was. So it was unfortunate, but I'm going to have to drop him outside the top 10 just for that alone. Antonelli, poor qualified, didn't really get it together. Understandable though, because it's just sort of first qualifying. But again, not really quick enough over quali's sort of stint or how he performed anyway. Then he did get into the points, but it was through a lot of luck, and Mercedes brought him in at the right time. So I don't think he would have made too much of a decision there. So yeah, he came 5th, and obviously it was an outstanding performance for a sort of rookie, but a lot of that was down to the safety car and him getting lucky, because he did also spin at the start of the race. Stroll, obviously he's cleaned up again, similar to Antonelli, pitted at the right time, but he was 15 seconds behind Alonso after 30 laps in the opening stint before Alonso binned it. So yeah, he had a nice P6, he kept it on track, but yeah, nothing to shout home about, and that's why I put him down at 13th. But let me know your thoughts. I want to know where you guys would have ranked each driver. I want to know what you guys would rate them. So let me know in the comments below. So yeah, that is it. That is the first race of the SAF1 Championship. So we'll see how that goes. And now we're going to jump straight into my SAF1 analysis notes, my key takeaways from the weekend. 2025 Australian GP analysis notes. 1. Ferrari have changed car concept because they felt like they had reached the ceiling of development with last year's car design. They will likely have to go forwards in the pecking order. It's a bold move with only 1 year left of the current regulations, and it will be interesting to see which types of corners they are strong at with the new car design. 2. Racing Bulls were one of the strongest teams in lower speed corners at the Australian GP, perhaps an inherent characteristic of their car or just something setup specific. 3. Alonso faster than qualifying results showed, as he looked to have the pace to reach Q3 but ended up damaging his floor. 4. Ferrari, Red Bull and potentially Mercedes, pretty equal with McLaren's pace in the high speed sectors 1 and 2 in qualifying, but lost chunks in sector 3 as it's the more technical part of the circuit, where the McLaren's advanced aerodynamic package is beneficial and maintains healthy tyre temperature. 5. Lawson was the only driver on the grid to have not driven at Albert Park before and then missed FP3 due to a technical fault, but still slower than expected as the Red Bull proves again to be a difficult car to drive. 6. Sainz and Hamilton taking some time to understand how to extract quality pace out of their new respective cars. 7. Fastest lap point has been cancelled for 2025, therefore meaning there will be no incentive to box for the fastest lap, and as a result it will go to the fastest car and drive a combination more frequently. 8. Still figuring out if Mercedes will still be slow in hotter conditions and faster in cooler conditions this season due to overworking their tyres. Perhaps they've made efforts to stabilise this within their car development for 2025. 9. Many other teams have seemed to carry over similar car characteristics as they've stuck with their previous development path. 10. Good step for Piastri as he continues to learn from experience. Average 0.25 seconds behind Norris at this circuit last year, down to just under 0.1 seconds in qualifying this year. He's a couple years away from being an even match. At present time, Norris still has a noticeable edge around more technical circuits. Right, now that's a wrap for my first video on YouTube. We've got the Chinese Grand Prix coming up in this weekend. So I'm going to be attempting to do one of these videos after each race. And it should drop on the Wednesday or the Thursday for each race week. Additionally, if you want access to some of my bets, then on screen you can see there's a QR code for my free tips group. Also, if you're interested in my premium group, you can go over to my Instagram, drop me a message. And all the links will be in the description. So yeah, first video on YouTube complete. Until next time, goodbye.